Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the penultimate story in Series 6, Closing Time, written by Gareth Roberts and is directed by Steve Hughes. We'll also be slightly tackling the short little episode that's part of the Night in the Doctor series, Up All Night, written by Tom McCrane, with no credited director to the project. This is the series light episode. This is the one where you can tell where all the budget has gone away from, and this is actually a direct sequel to sorts to the last episode like this, the last low budget episode of the series, The Lodger. And like The Lodger, it's a story which is a Doctor Heavy companion light adventure and features the return of Craig Owens in that story, played by James Corden. Now, before anything, I just want to state that since doing the video for The Lodger, many things have come out about James Corden and how he attended some union meetings and tried to basically get his writers less pay. So I have no my morals are not hurt by the fact that I can simply say I hate James Corden. He is an absolute scumbag in real life, and most of the characters he plays aren't that funny or interesting in any stretch of the word. So that being said, this story also is the first in the 11th Doctor era to be a Cyberman story. The Cybermen have appeared in the 11th Doctor era before. Most noticeably, a damaged one appeared in the story The Pandora Opens in the Big Bang. And they also had a cameo appearance in the story A Good Man Goes to War, whilst this story is their first full-on episode. However, it's also not. As you see, I think it's clear to anybody viewing the 11th Doctor era that Stephen Moffat has no real interest in the Cybermen. He gives the Cybermen to Gareth Roberts, one of the writers who does those low-budget aspects, and they're only used in this story so that they don't have to re-establish a new threat. There's nothing iconic, there's nothing that's distinctly Cybermen in this story. They could be replaced with any generic monster, with any alien force, and the story won't suffer from it, with the exception of the fact that we are familiar with the Cybermen, so you don't have to explain what these what the Cybermen deal is. I could argue that that is a very weak point to make, and you could have a new villain. You just don't have to set them up that much. You know, the focus is mainly the characters, the main protagonists in the story. The villains are just sort of the background, the B-plot to the narrative. So I don't think it would have really mattered. And it just felt like a waste to have the Cybermen get treated like this, and the way they get so easily defeated by just a bunch of mundane situations makes the Cybermen feel really unimportant to the Doctor Who franchise. So you can probably get by the tone and I'm going with this, that the story isn't that particularly strong. At least it deals with the Cybermen anyway. And the mainstream public seems to agree that this is one of the, if not the weakest story in the 11th Doctor era. It's usually not talked about, and when it is, it's talked about as one of the most weakest, one of the most boring, one of the most uninspiring stories, bringing back a character only a handful of people liked from Series 5, and bringing back the Cybermen, but not doing anything really with them, with a mundane setting, which makes this story feel really, really uninspiring compared to most stories in Series 6. However, the way it's directed, Steve Hughes, his directing, he really gives this story a life of its own. Even though it's set, like I said, in mundane settings, they're in a supermarket, they're in Craig's house. That's only really the majority of the settings, is those two locations. But Hughes gets a huge amount of visual shots from these stories from this story. So props to him. He's an amazing guy, and highly recommend you track down his work, especially his I think his university short films. They are brilliant, and his show reel as well. His show reel are also brilliant. But anyway, that's the mainstream opinion. But before we talk that, let's talk about Up All Night. This is an unusual story in the Night and the Doctor series. For starters, it doesn't feature the Doctor, nor does it have no mention of River Song, making it a complete standalone from the rest of them. In fact, it's very strange. According to some sources, I don't actually own the DVD for it, but this story is on a separate disc compared to the rest of them, implying that originally it was supposed to be its own separate thing. It's only when the title Up All Night, and they were like, oh yeah, it's night, we may as well collect it as part of the Night and the Doctor series. It's mainly just setting up Craig and his partner Sophie. They're just living in this new house of theirs, and we're basically setting up that Craig is going to look after their baby. They have a baby called Alfie now on his own, and he doesn't feel comfortable with it. You know, he talks to Sophie and is like, everybody says to trust your instincts, but I have no instincts whatsoever. Are you sure you want to do this? And that's basically it. There's nothing really groundbreaking. There's not a lot of character or anything. It's just fluff. And what's really weird is that for a prequel to the Cybermen, and you have it written by Tom McCrane, the writer of Age of Steel and what's the other one? And Rise of the Cybermen. You put him in a prequel to the Cyberman story. You don't make him write for the Cybermen. You make him write for Craig, Owen, and Sophie. That's just really strange to me. But this is a story which I honestly suggest that you skip. It kind of ruins the pre-opening scene in the start of the actual episode closing time, and the character at the start of this, where Craig is he's confronting all of his fears about looking after the baby by himself, to Sophie, clashes with the start of closing time, in which he's, at least at face value, is trying to appear that he can deal with looking after the baby on his own, so that Sophie doesn't have to worry and go, which is a complete contrast to here, in which he is seemingly panicking to her and is just like, you can't let me look after the baby on my own, I have no idea what I'm doing. Which, yeah, bad parenting. But, it does make him feel really unlikable in this one, because, he doesn't even make an attempt to try and be a responsible dad. He just laughs. He's like, Sophie, you've got to look after the baby because I'm useless. Which then again begs the question, what the hell does Sophie see in him? But yeah, so in this case, this is one of the few prequels where I recommend you skip. It just, not only is it fluff, but I think it actually harms the experience of the main episode it's trying to be a prequel of. So, yeah, don't watch it. It's mainly just fluff anyway. You're not missing out on a lot. But in terms of the characters, it really doesn't add up here, and it does kind of ruin the twist at the start of the story. With closing time, starting with Craig and Sophie. Oh, I forgot to mention in the prequel, at the end there's this whole lights, those lights are flickering. They explain it, it's just like, oh, it's just the council. The council also need to fix the wiring and the cables and stuff, which ties into closing time. But anyway, in closing time, Craig, like I said, the story actually starts off as a bit of a teaser where Sophie they don't really mention the baby. They just like, oh yeah, you'll be fine, like, handling it on my own. And Craig is just like, go, I'll be fine on my own. I can sort this on my own. And Sophie's just like, okay, but I might let some pointers on the fridge. You might get a call from my mum and your mum. just make sure you're okay, just to that you're coping. To which Craig again gets frustrated upon, he calls up his mother later on in the episode, and this is like, I don't need help, stop stressing, I'm fine. Again, a complete contrast to how he was in the previous, in the prequel, only for someone to knock on the door. He thinks it's Sophie, so he starts shouting to himself. He's like, I'm coping on my own. I am coping on my own. Opens the door to reveal the 11th Doctor, who somehow has tracked down Craig, despite the fact that he's moved house. And that is kind of a running, a fun little joke there. Whilst the 11th Doctor here, he's actually wearing his green coat that we've previously seen him wear at the start of Let's Kill Hitler, and we've also seen him here wearing in The Girl Who Waited. In those stories, he only wore it for a brief time before taking it off and replacing it. So this is the full story in which he wears it for the entire episode, which is really strange. It does, like the fact that he keeps jumping between these costumes with this wearing, does seem really strange. And, I do kind of like the 11th Doctor having a different variety of costumes, and I really love that green jacket. I wish he used it a bit more. I wish that Series 6 Part B, he wore that for the entirety of that run. Of course, he has to re-wear his usual tweed, because at the start of The Impossible Astronaut. But I don't know. I just think it looks really cool, personally. There's also the recurrent joke of, I've seen you redecorated, I don't like it. A reference, of course, to the second Doctor, who has said it in both the 3 and the 5 Doctors. I think has he said it anywhere else? I think he might have said it. I know there's a story where he goes to UNIT, and he might have said it in there. I think that's the Web of Fear. I think he says it in the Web of Fear on the Invasion. I can't remember. Someone can correct me in the comments below if you think you know. But yeah, what's one of the biggest strengths of the story, which I think everybody can agree on, is that Matt Smith's performance here, to which this story basically plays as a comedy. It's a buddy cop comedy. Not a buddy cop comedy, but it's a buddy comedy at the very least. In fact, in interviews, Steve Hughes compared it to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, with Craig and the Doctor being, of course, Abbott and Costello. So there's that movement with them. They work physically and personality-wise. They work off each other, and I love how fluent the Doctor's movements is. I love how when he's acting concerned, and Craig points it out, the Doctor kind of twists around and tries to hide his face before turning back around, and tries to show as confident as he can. Matt Smith's performance is clearly the highlight of this story. He is so energetic, and despite this story, which I think a lot of Doctors would not maybe give a bad performance, might give it clearly this is not their episode. They would stay in the background and let the side characters take the spotlight for a change. Matt Smith here kind of steals the spotlight, and it makes you wish that the 11th Doctor was the main protagonist rather than a duo between him and Craig in some sense. But not to say that Craig as a character is all bad here. He does have his elements of being this normal, mundane person. As, for example, the Doctor is just concerned for a moment because Craig said he's on his own. However, the Doctor's scanning and he can detect another life form upstairs. Whereas Craig is just no, don't worry, everything is fine. Only to the Doctor to wake up and surprise, is a baby. Again, the twist is kind of spoilt in the fact of the prequel story, if you've seen that prior to this episode. But yeah, and that's basically the story. And I actually like this element of the story because Craig in the Lodger was basically the straight man, which is actually a something unique to James Corden's performances. Usually he plays the funny fat guy. Here he plays the straight man. In the Lord Show, he plays the straight man to the Doctor. And that works there, but you can't repeat it twice. So here, he is on board with the Doctor. He's on terms with the Doctor. However, what brings him back to normal lifestyle is the fact that he's looking after a baby. And that's where kind of most of the humour comes from. And a lot of the jokes are kind of like you've seen it here, but you've seen it loads of times before. You've got, everybody mistaking the Doctor and Craig as a couple because it's two men and a baby. And there's a character in the shop that the Doctor later works on. I am getting kind of tired after the Lodger, which actually kind of really is painful to watch when rewatching this episode, is that the Doctor is like this character that everybody just gets along with, which is a complete contrast to Craig, in which he is, he's either an average guy or people kind of find him as a strange oddball who can't do anything right. And I think it kind of works in the Lodger, but here it just shows how little he's developed as a character. There's a scene in which the Doctor needs to go investigate him, and he basically gets Craig to help with the investigation. Ask around, you got a baby? Go around and talk to people. You've got a baby. People like talking to babies. Talking to you as a owner of a baby. Maybe you can get some information across. The Doctor quickly goes to someone and gets some information that there is a little metal rat floating around the shop, seemingly eating electricity, and also the Doctor notices earlier on that there's the power outages. I actually like the start of the story in which the Doctor, he actually doesn't want to get involved. In fact, he describes at the start of the story he's on a farewell tour, and he's only doing like a social visit and meeting Craig. He's never done a social visit before, so it was kind of unique. It's kind of strange for him. But so he kind of like gets in and tries to leave, only he keeps noticing the power outages, and so he investigates by working in the shop, and everybody seems to fall in love with him. With Craig, on the other hand, does not. And there's this really painful scene in which Craig tries to have the Doctor try to talk to people, and his idea is to talk to one of the workers in the lingerie section, and just comes off as a complete creep. And the fact that Craig is supposed to be this normal guy, like, watch that scene again. Would anyone be put in that situation, even if they did believe about like Cybermen and monsters and stuff like that? Would anyone go up to a female character, a female person like that, worker in a laundry, and talk like that? Have you seen anything suspicious around here? Introduced to a handshake like that? It's really uncomfortable to watch, and it's just not funny. It is so not funny, and this is where the main problem of the story is. But every time Matt Smith gets a humorous line, a humorous zone, he absolutely nails it. There's a great moment where he's talking to a character, and she kind of is implying the Doctor and Craig are a couple. It's a bit of a terrible, not a terrible joke, it's a bit of an unfunny joke where the Doctor likes the term companion, but this character, believing that they are a couple, says partners. And the Doctor's just like, because he's an alien and he doesn't understand social quirks, he's just like, I like it, but is it better than companion? And they're like having this kind of a small little debate, not realising, of course, he thinks that, not realising, that they're supposed to be like his couple or anything. But Matt Smith absolutely nails it, and you can see as a character, it really works. Everything revolving around Craig on his own really doesn't. And that all comes ahead again with the Cybermen, where the Cybermen, there's nothing really, anything interesting about them. Well, I tell a lie. There is something interesting about them, but it's more to do with how the Doctor solves the problem. For you see, the Doctor sees that the Cybermen around are stomping around and taking people from the shop. There's a teleporter in the elevator, which seems to have taken them to the Cybermen ship. The Doctor thinks they're in space, and the Doctor teleports them back down and shuts off the teleportation system. He tries to scan up for the sky, but he can't find anything. It must be cloaked. But what's really interesting is that when it's revealed where the Cybermen are, it's actually kind of like it's actually kind of a great twist, because the Doctor's so used to solving the problems like 2 feet ahead, but he doesn't kind of consider that it might not be so as scientific sci-fi storyline as it initially appears to be. So that's kind of interesting. So let's talk about one of the biggest strengths about the story, and that is the Doctor dealing with his arriving death, as we get a little lull moment in the middle, which this is easily like the best bit of the episode. Essentially, we have 2 conversations happening. We have one with the Doctor and Alfie, which one of the best running jokes is that the Doctor speaks baby, and Alfie likes to be called McEdam, Dark Lord of All, which is completely steals the spotlight. But if it wasn't for Matt Smith translating the dialogue, that joke might not have worked as strong as it did. But the Doctor basically explains this baby. It's like, don't worry, don't cry. You got so much more misery to look forward to. You've got debt, you've got taxes, you've got bills to pay, you've got a 9-to-5 job that you've got looking forward to. So save the tears for later. For now, just enjoy life. And the Doctor then shows him the stars, and it's just like, you've got so much to look forward to. And when I was young, I used to look up to the stars, and to say in your age, I lived the dream, I was on the stage. And he's kind of looking to the future, to the sense, for the baby. There's then a scene where Cybermen, which is actually the first time they've appeared on screen since the 1970s story Revenge of the Cybermen, but they've also recently appeared in the video game Blood of the Cybermen, a Doctor Who adventure game starring the 11th Doctor and Amy Pond. So yeah, this was kind of cool to see the Cybermen. The Cybermen designs is actually really cool here. They're very simple. It's a very simple design, and they look kind of cute until they open their mouths and they've got this organic teeth, and they've got like an electronic bite. It's a really cool design, and it's up there as one of the best Cybermen design by far, easily beating the ones from the Revenge of the Cybermen. Maybe compare with Tomb of the Cybermen, I don't know. But after that encounter, the Doctor then has a kind of a 180 in terms of his conversation, and he talks to Craig and Alfie about him looking back on his life and how, he's lived for so long. The story is actually set almost 100 years after the last episode, The God Complex, as the Doctor states that his death, his impending doom, is due tomorrow, which for time travel, how the hell does that work? The Doctor could easily just stall it and stall it and stall it, but the Doctor comes to terms, he's coming to terms with it, and he's talking to Craig and Alfie, who fall asleep at this point. So he's really just monologuing to himself, and he's reflecting on his past, and it's like how many adventures he's had, but it's all leading up to this one moment, his impending death, and it's all about him coming to terms with his own deaths. And a beautifully written scene, a beautifully acted scene. It's just, I wish it was in a better story, because after that, and when the Doctor goes back to the shop to fight the Cybermen, does the story take a huge drop in quality, even though there isn't much quality to begin with, as the Doctor goes to find the Cybermen, which turns out to actually not be from space, but they've actually crash landed under the surface of the Earth, and they basically, human civilization of London is built on top of them, and it wasn't because of the council making rewiring work that the Cybermen were able to re-energize themselves. I believe they say 6 Cybermen However, one of the working titles of this story was 3 Cybermen and a Baby. So I could be wrong on that front. So yeah, the Cybermen here, they don't have anything interesting to say. The Doctor confronts them, and we've got to talk about the Cybermen for a bit, because these are Cybermen designs from the 2006, which were established as being part of the parallel universe Cybermen. However, their logos have changed. They have a chest piece with the C logo on their chests. However, here it's replaced with just some sort of circle pieces. This was supposed to be an implication that these are actually the first appearance in the revived era of the Mondasian Cybermen. Actually, I could be wrong. I believe actually A Good Man Goes to War was the first appearance of the Mondasian Cybermen. I could be wrong on those two fronts. But this is the first, apparently, the Mondasian Cybermen. However, nothing is actually stated on screen, and because they seem very little representation here, in my head canon, in my mind, when I watch this story, this is the parallel universe Cybermen. Sure, they are like the Mondasian Cybermen. There's only a handful of them. Usually in the classic series, there's only a handful of Cybermen, with a bar and a few exceptions like Earthshock and Attack of the Cybermen. And the story is usually about them trying to survive, and that what makes them so threatening. A great example is, of course, the Tomb of the Cybermen, in which the Cybermen, they have to freeze themselves, and they basically lure traps into people, specifically clever people, to come in so they can convert them and regain their armies. And that's kind of one of the fears, that they will do anything to survive. This is a civilization which has kind of given up all kind of morality just on the sole purpose of surviving. That's what makes the Cybermen so interesting. And there is that element here. However, the story does nothing to say anything, to do anything with that premise, which then again firmly states in my mind these are actually the parallel universe Cybermen from the 2006 story, The Rise of Cybermen and The Age of Steel. Also as well, Tom McCrane wrote the prequel episode to this, and he also was, I guess, the creator of the parallel Cybermen. It just seems to kind of make sense in that regard. So yeah, in my head, these are the parallel universe Cybermen still active within the universe of the Doctor Who's end space. For those of you who don't know, the Doctor Who universe is classed as end space, or Earth. I want to say it's Earth 12283. I'm definitely wrong on that point. Forget I said that. But yeah, the ending of this story just outright sucks. Essentially, Craig gets he storms in to the shop. He gives his baby to one of the workers there, the one that the Doctor was friendly with earlier, as he runs to him, to which that woman believes that the Doctor and Craig have had an argument. So she tries to look after the baby so they can sort out the argument, not realising that the whole world is at stake. And Craig comes in, he tries to defeat the Cybermen, or at least try to bluff himself out of the way so he can save the Doctor. However, the Cybermen, actually a really clever thing the story kind of does is that Craig has been following the Doctor's advice, and he's been following the Doctor throughout the story. And so when Craig comes in, he basically acts like he solved everything. He worked out the teleporter, and he worked out that the Cybermen were underground, and the Cybermen actually mistake that as real intelligence. So they actually they see Craig, and it's like, you are perfect for conversion. And so they trap him, they capture him, and they put him into a cyber-converted machine, to which the Doctor feels omnipotently guilty for. And that is actually a really cool element of the story. If Craig was turned into a Cyberman here, it would kind of not complete, but it would push his story arc further. The Doctor left Amy and Rory back because he was worried that he was endangering Amy and Rory's life. It was their faith in him that got them nearly killed in the previous story, or at least the previous story from our point of view. And the Series 6 does kind of have this theme going on. There's a few episodes in Series 6 where the Doctor seems to get himself involved in family life and family affairs, and because of it, it has affected people sometimes in positively ways, but mostly negative. A great example again is the fantastic The Girl Who Waited, in which Amy was left because of time traveling shenanigans, and she became this bitter old woman in that story, or at least a version of her, and it tears the relationship between Rory and Amy, and it's really the Doctor's fault, and the Doctor puts it in his mind that he is the one to solve it, he is the one to fix the problem, until the very end, to which he gives Rory the decision. So this seems to be a great, not a conclusion, but a great building up of that storyline. The Doctor worrying that, he puts families in danger, and having Craig be cyber converted in front of his eyes, leaving a baby without a father, would clearly push that element further. However, I can't believe I'm going to say this, the baby starts crying and Craig overpowers the cyber conversion and actually blows up the Cybermen with the power of love. The Cybermen are defeated by the inherent genes of a father and son, the power of love. And before you come up with the excuse, oh no, the Doctor was originally going to say, oh no, that's grossly a simplification, and then he goes into explaining, and then he's like, oh yes, actually, you know what, it was the power of love. Think about it like this. Do you ever think that anybody prior to being cyber converted, before Craig, never thought about their loved ones, never once tried to fight the cyber conversion? If you go by this story, Craig was the only person who ever thought about their children before their impending doom. That is completely bullshit. In fact, there's an entire episode of Torchwood that is dedicated to the idea that when someone is cyber converted, they do not turn back. It is a one-way system. But no, the story needs a happy ending. So Craig is free from cyber conversion and destroys the Cybermen by blowing them all up. And then the end of the story actually sets up for the finale, the wedding of River Song. Usually the episode, it's been a tradition at this point that the previous story to the finale will tease up for the main finale event, and this does something here. The Doctor in Craig's house, who's after cleaning the house before Sophie arrives, he picks up blue envelopes, TARDIS blue envelopes, which are the envelopes we see in The Impossible Astronaut. And Craig also gives the Doctor a Stetson, which, of course, the Doctor wears at the start of The Impossible Astronaut. And before the Doctor goes into his TARDIS, and there's this really strange scene where he randomly talks to 3 kids, and then those kids become eyewitnesses to the Doctor's accounts, and then it cuts to the university in the far distant future when River Song, who is now a professor, is studying on the Doctor, to which she then gets captured by Madame Kadvari and 2 silencers, and part of the silence cult, the silence religion, and we basically learn that Madame Kavarian has trained River Song to be the perfect assassin, even though at this point she has no memory of who Madame Kavarian is, has no idea what is going on. She has no idea what the silence is, which is really bizarre. That just goes against everything. But the scene is really well shot and it's really creepy. I especially love the reintroduction to the song from Night Terrors, the one that goes tick tock goes the clock, and is tied more heavily with the Doctor. And essentially we learn as the cliffhanger for this story, but it's actually River Song that's in the suit, the automatic suit, and it's she who gets put into Lake Silencio and is the one who kills the Doctor at the start of The Impossible Astronaut, which is a really confusing statement, but hopefully it makes sense when we get to the next story. And so that is Closing Time and its prequel, Up All Night. Overall, this story is really weak. There's very little to get a kick out of. Matt Smith owns it as the Doctor in the story. His relationship with Craig in the story also works out really well. However, when it comes to Craig specifically, I feel like the story is flat, and the Cybermen being a massive B plot of the story, which, you know, Cybermen are my favourite monsters, really just hinder the enjoyment for me personally. But there might be some people out there that might get a few kicks out it. Stephen Hughes is a fantastic director, and even though this story is very mundane, with a lot of like shopping and not much going on in terms of a threat, Steve Hughes really gives the directing a sort of style, a sort of substance, and you never feel bored visually with the story. So massive props to Steve Hughes. He should really direct another low budget episode like this, just with better writing, hopefully. So that's Closing Time and Up All Night. So join me next time where we conclude Series 6 as the Doctor is about to die. However, time goes wibbly wobbly as the Doctor finds himself alive. Yes, the universe is breaking, it's corrupted, it is shattering, only because River Song refuses to kill the Doctor. So join me next time for The Wedding of River Song. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!